Hello, I'm Andrew.
Hello, I'm Lisa.
Welcome to episode 60 of
Round the Archives. Yes, we're back.
We're back. We've been away, but
Yes.
now we're back.
Well, we haven't actually been away. We just haven't been doing anything.
Well, that's not true, because we've been on the Shy Life podcast.
Yeah.
We've been on Vision on Sound.
Yeah.
We've been on A Raspberry Mivvy and a Footlong Dog. And we've been on Goon Pod, where we got
have.
to talk about Michael Bentine's potty time.
We did, yes.
So you better catch up with all of those.
Yes.
But anyway, let's get on with episode 60, because we're going to have a look at...
Maigret.
Good afternoon, Lisa.
Good afternoon, Andrew.
Wow, you've got a big box of Maigret, haven't you?
We have the complete 60 series.
Now, one thing I forgot to say in the introduction is that as this is episode 60, everything we're doing is from the 60s.
It is.
And Maigret starts in 1960.
1960, yeah.
So why did we get Maigret then?
It looked interesting.
Yeah.
I'm always a sucker for police series. And it's actually turned out to be rather unexpected.
Unexpectedly odd?
Yes.
Is that your description?
Yes, because you look at it and you think, oh, it's going to be something like No Hiding Place, which is a sort of late 50s, does go into the 60s police procedural.
Yeah.
But it's nothing like that. There's all sorts of odd stories, very odd acting.
Yeah.
And it's really good fun.
Well, when you think about sort of police series, early 60s, Dixon or Doc Green is still running.
Yes, so Dixon and Doc Green will be running for a long time, yeah.
And we've got Z Cars sort of in the wings, haven't we?
Yes, about to pop up.
And, of course, Sergeant Cork. And Sergeant Cork probably goes for the oddest stories out of those other ones.
Yeah.
But does Maigret top them all for oddness, do you think?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, sometimes it's quite simple, and it's a simple story of whichever crime. It's mostly murders, to be honest. But there are lots of odd reasons.
Yeah. And odd performances as well.
And very odd performances, yes.
It's very good for weird guest stars,
It
isn't
is.
it?
Well, for guest stars acting weirdly.
Yeah, lots of familiar faces there.
Yes.
But inevitably, you've got the books as well, haven't you?
I've got one omnibus book. Yes.
And this gives you the original stories.
Yes.
Now, the opening episode is from Monday, the 31st of October, 1960, shown at 8:45.
Yes.
And it's Murder in Montmartre.
Yes.
Now, what did you say this was based on? What story was it?
It's based on, it says novel, but they're very short novels. Apparently, George Simeon could knock out a story or a book in less than a day.
Yeah.
So it's based on Murder at Picard's, which is the name of the bar that he goes to and the
although
murder girl works in.
I think the more commercial title is the other one, Inspector Maigret and the Strangled Stripper.
Yeah, that's going to sensationalised. That's the one.
Not censorited. Yeah. It's not got Peter Glaze in it, though. I don't know whether he does pop up. You never know.
No, don't.
But yeah, this story is the one they always seem to make when they do Maigret.
Yes,
don't they?
There have been three different English version series of Maigret on one sort of film with Richard Harris. And in each of the 3 series, one in the 60s, which is the Rupert Davies version, the version we're talking about, one in the early 90s starring Michael Gambon, and one in the sort of late sort of 2010s with Rowan Atkinson. And each of those series makes this story.
But comparing the 3 performances, have you seen them all now?
I have seen, yes, I've seen Rowan Atkinson, but not in that story, in a different version of a different Maigret story. And I think out of the 3, I like Rupert Davies the best. He fits the picture of Maigret.
But Simenon is meant to have said, "I found the perfect Maigret" when he saw Rupert Davies. And do you agree with that?
I think so.
Is he like what the description is in the books?
In the books, he's described as a big man.
Yeah.
And Rupert Davies is a sort of big, tall actor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of the sort of familiar faces do have some Zcast crossover, don't they? Because the one we watched t'other night had Stratford Johns in it. This is the episode, what was it, Maigret and the Cactus?
Yes,
or the Cactus.
The Cactus.
And by this point, I'd thought, well, does Stratford Johns turn into a cactus or something? I wouldn't put it past it at this point.
No, it doesn't.
But what's the cactus? It's a signalling cactus, isn't it?
It
doesn't wave its leaves about.
No, it's a signal to somebody's lover that if the cactus is in the window, her husband's at home, so don't come.
I noticed you bought 3 cactuses recently, Lisa. Should I be worried?
No, because they're succulents.
They certainly are. But yeah, saying about lovers and things, there's an awful lot of lovers and mistresses and things going on in these stories, aren't they?
Sort of, in that sense, it's stereotypically French, what you think French people get up to. And I'm not even sure that they do, really.
Or is it what George Simenon was interested in?
Yes, George Simenon apparently did like the ladies.
You'd like the ladies.
So, yeah.
But yeah, you've got Rupert Davies as Maigret. You've got Ewan Solon.
Yes.
As Lucas. Now, Ewan Solon, Doctor Who people know from Planet of Evil and The Savages. Yeah. And Neville Jason.
Yes, a very young Neville
from
Jason.
The Androids of Tara.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And his missus is Helen Shingler, isn't she? I don't know her so much.
She is in Enemy at the Door.
Oh, right, okay.
She's Peter Porteus's mother in that.
Right,
She's mostly in a wheelchair getting wheeled from one room to another. It's not very exciting, really.
But yeah, Murder in Montmartre also has Frida Jackson in it.
Yes.
She's from the first episode of Adam Ant Lives, isn't she?
She is, yeah.
And playing Arlette, the stripper, is, how do you say it? April Ulrich?
Yes, I imagine so.
Yeah. And I was watching this for ages, thinking I recognise her, but I couldn't work out what she was from. And I think did we have to look it up in the end, or did you clock who she was?
I think we realised that she's in Whodunit.
She's in Whodunit Time to Die, the Paul Darrow one, where he's doing Columbo. And she's Lady Penelope, the one that gets killed.
She gets killed. She's got a very distinctive voice.
She's got boggly eyes as well.
Yeah.
And again, she gets to use the boggly eyes in this.
Yeah.
I also noticed that she's in Robert's Robots as well as Desiree, which reminds me we should get on with watching Robert's Robots. We should watch more
Robert's Robots, yes.
But it starts off quite saucily, really, for a 1960 show. I mean, it's 8:45, but you've got ladies taking their clothes off.
We don't actually see anything, do you? It's all shot.
No, but I've got an imagination, Lisa.
It's all shot. If there's any of that, it's all shot on the actress's face. Yeah. So. But
would you say it's a bit of a convoluted plot? Because she comes in and wants to report a murder.
Yes, she does.
Which hasn't happened yet or something, isn't it?
It's a little bit convoluted.
Yeah.
But it's maybe more overcomplicated than it needs to be.
Yeah. What I took at home from this, images you get, the murderer lives in a cupboard, doesn't he?
Yeah, he hides in cupboards. Yeah.
Well.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I would say is that where in a modern police series you would get more focus on the killer, here he only appears in the last, not even 5 minutes of the episode, and is killed, and that's it.
Yeah.
You don't actually get to see him. He's just in the background as this sort of faceless character.
Yeah, but I thought the sort of Neville Jason stuff was interesting as well.
Yes.
Because it makes it more human. You better explain his sort of involvement with it?
Well, basically, he has been not having a relationship, but he had gone to the bar and he's sort of fallen in love with the murdered girl.
You better say that Neville Jason's like his sort of junior copper, isn't he?
He's like the sort of the young...
Like PC Sweet or something.
Yeah. Well, or DC or whatever, because he's a detective, isn't he? So, whatever the equivalent in France is of that. He's the sort of junior one. He gets all the sort of rubbish jobs, probably. So, but yes, he's in love with her, and he's very upset when he finds out she's dead. And Maigret is surprisingly nice and understanding. You would think he was going to be a sort of harder.
Yeah.
He's not. He's very sympathetic and very human, even to the criminals.
Yeah, you've also got Aubrey Woods. Yes. Being is he sort of a drug addict or something?
Yeah, very young Aubrey Woods.
Yeah, and he gets to wander about on location as well, doesn't he?
He does. Yeah, they had to fly him out to France because a lot of this is shot in Paris, and this is probably the last time you could shoot in Paris and it look like it used to look before it gets sort of more modernised, I think.
Do you think they get away with the filming? Because there's a lot of the public, or what I assume is the public, but I haven't spotted much gawping, have you?
No. I mean, the thing is, I do spend quite a lot of these episodes trying to work out what period they're set in. Because obviously they're set in the present time, so 1960, but they don't feel like that. They feel like they should be set a bit earlier. But then you wouldn't be able to afford to have the amount of people wandering around.
Yeah.
Because, I think it is set in the present day, but it sort of feels like it should be sort of 10 years or so before that, at least.
But this is available in a box set, isn't it? Is it a network job?
It is.
Yeah. And it is just amazing that it all survives.
Yeah.
And it scrubs up fairly well, because this is a Blu-ray.
This is a Blu-ray version. I think there's a DVD version as well. So.
Yeah. But then, you compare it to lots of other shows around this point, and its survival is just a bit of a miracle, really, isn't it? But we've watched about 2 discs worth.
We're on to the third disc now. We skipped the first episode on the third disc to watch the one with Stratford Johnson, so we need to go back and watch that one.
But we've also seen Unscheduled Departure. That's the one with Peter Copley in, isn't it? Yeah, and he's a bit. Is he a bit bonkers in that as well?
Everybody seems to be a little bit odd and a bit bonkers. Yeah.
Hugh Burden turns up in The Burglar's Wife, and then you've got Peter Stevens in The Revolver.
Oh gosh, yes.
And what's he doing? He's raving, isn't he?
Yeah, he's raving and wailing and screaming. It's a most extraordinary performance.
Yeah.
I mean, Peter Stevens, for anybody that's seen the episodes that exist from 2 sort of mid-60s episodes, will know Peter Stevens for being the Billy Bunter-esque schoolboy Cyril in The Celestial Toy Maker, and the one of the priests in The Underwater Menace.
Yeah. But he's away with, I don't know what he's doing, but it is very funny.
Yes.
But The Revolver is the one where Maigret has to go to England, doesn't he?
He does.
And is it true that he sort of turns up the Frenchness a bit?
A little bit, yes. Yes, because it's a bit like Van der Valk in a way, where names and titles have the French accent or the French intonation on them. Apart from that, they're all speaking in sort of English accents until he goes to England, at which point he has to rev up the Frenchness just a little bit. And he's a bit more French in that episode.
There's the episode of Man of Quality, and I was watching an actor thinking, who's that? Who is... he looks a bit like Wilfrid Bramble, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And then I realised it was Wilfrid Bramble with his best teeth in.
Yes.
Because he was quite unrecognisable.
He was.
Really.
He was. Doing a bit of a accent.
Doing a bit of a voice.
Yes.
But you've also got a Professor Quatermass turning up, haven't you?
Yes, John Robinson.
You've got John Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
And who was the klaxon in the episode following it?
Gordon Gosterlow.
Gordon Gosterlow giving
a really understated performance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Weird that.
Yeah. So
don't get to see that often.
Well, mostly you just get to see Gordon Gosterlow being Gordon Gosterlow.
Yeah.
Really. So.
But some of the other guests actually outdo him for once, don't they?
Yeah.
But what do you think of it so far?
I'm really enjoying it. Yeah, it's sort of totally not what I expected.
No.
But I like it. I like the performance that Rupert Davies is giving.
Mm-hmm.
I like all the supporting characters. And I like the character.
Yeah.
Because he is very human.
Yeah, I mean, we did talk about Maigret as part of a sort of longer chat about detectives on Martin's show Vision on Sound. We should mention that. Mm-hmm. Go and have a listen to that as well. Yeah. But how much more have we got to do? Quite a bit.
Quite a bit, yeah. There's 52 episodes altogether, so I think we've done about 9 or 10.
Yeah. So we've scratched the surface, yes. But we can take a deeper dive as we go on. But yeah, recommended though?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Get yourself it if you can.
If you like that sort of thing.
Yeah. Would you say DVD or Blu-ray or whatever's available now?
I would say, well, not everybody has a Blu-ray player yet, so get whichever version you think is best for you. Yeah. It looks good on Blu-ray.
Yeah. You get a nice shot of BBC TV Centre at the end in the end credits, don't you?
You'll get that anyway. So, but yeah, if you can afford to get the Blu-ray, get the Blu-ray.
Yeah. All right. So. Well, there you go. Get yourself a bit of Maigret then. And then put your cactus in the window if you have to. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for helping with that, Lisa.
That's okay, thank you.
Right, staying with the 60s, as we indicated. Now Martin takes a look at...
The Avengers.
A little over 60 years ago, and barely a month after the series which inspired it was cancelled, partly in a fit of litigious pique, a television series began that would in many ways come to encapsulate a particular view of 1960s Britain that never really went away. It was so popular in certain countries, especially France and America, and who'd have thought that those two countries could ever agree about anything other than how bad the UK is, that this particular image of Britain and the British seems to have stuck in their minds and shaped their perception of us ever since. Well, perhaps the later variants of the show have. The earlier, far grittier incarnation, a lot of which was lost to that scourge of archive television fans everywhere, the videotape wiping policy of the 1960s and 1970s, is all but forgotten these days. Well, perhaps with the exception of a few die-hard fans and people who like or know a thing or two about archive television. The first series, consisting of 26 episodes, is mostly lost, and only 3 1/3 episodes of it remain, and even the survival of that is mostly due to luck rather than judgment. Happily, it is only that first year that is so afflicted, and the entire run of the rest of the series survives, most of it on film, and the final 2 series in a glorious version of colour television that truly displays the swinging 60s in all of its glory. This series was, of course, The Avengers, a 50-minute black and white crime and spy-themed drama series shot on 405-line videotape made by ABC Television for ITV. Well, I say drama because it is a scripted and indeed acted series, but it does have its tongue firmly planted in its cheek and approaches its stories with style, panache, flair and a little bit of the old twinkle in the eye, and doesn't take itself all that seriously. Or at least that's where the series is ultimately headed. A lot of the appeal of those later seasons is their level of, dare I say it, what can only be described as campness. But the strange thing about The Avengers is that it was not always that way, and the transformation happened within a short enough time frame to make you imagine that viewers brought up on the earlier series might very well have wondered what had happened to their gritty little spy drama to make it change quite so much from its roots. But as our consideration today is of all things 60, it is to that very first season that I'm going to concentrate on. Shot mostly live, the inverted commas are on the surviving caption cards, in multi-camera studios with filmed inserts, often it seems shot in the streets immediately surrounding the television studios, possibly so that they wouldn't have to unplug the cameras if the wires were long enough. The 3 surviving episodes from that very first series are, in order of original transmission, Girl on the Trapeze, The Frighteners, and the most recent find, Tunnel of Fear, all of which have been made available for home viewing, although one wasn't found in time to make it onto the rather smashing Series 1 and 2 box set release. Thanks to an archival fluke, the very first act of the very first episode, Hot Snow, also survives, found buried in an American archive for no discernible reason other than it was possibly from an ABC television overseas sales showreel. The interesting or tragic, if you happen to be the sort of person interested in the process of character development generally. Fact is, however, that strangely enough, given quite how identified with the series the other main star became, not a great deal of the surviving footage features John Steed, the mysterious, shadowy and not altogether trustworthy man from the Ministry who gets Dr. Keel involved in several of his dark schemes, played with a seemingly effortless charm by Patrick Macnee. One of the surviving episodes, Girl on the Trapeze, does not feature Steed at all, and he doesn't appear in that first act of Hot Snow either, leaving just The Frighteners and Tunnel of Fear for us to see him in action alongside Dr. Keel before the series is rejigged to make his character the central figure in the second series, initially alongside Dr. Martin King, in already written scripts in which one name is seemingly substituted by the other, as played by John Rollison, then alongside Julie Stevens as Venus Smith and her musical interludes, before settling upon the iconic leather-clad tour de force known as Mrs. Catherine Gale, as played by Honor Blackman. The running order of that series moves around a bit, so you could never quite know who the sidekick of the week is going to be, but once Mrs. Gale turned up it really was no contest, and the series settled into having one regular male and one regular female lead throughout the rest of the 1960s, only adding another action man in the form of Gareth Hunt as Mike Gambit when he appeared alongside Joanna Lumley as Purdy when the new Avengers roared into the schedules in the mid-1970s. Macnee is an odd figure. Often his acting style, or lack of it, comes in for some criticism in several quarters, but actually he is utterly perfect in the part of John Steed and makes it look so natural that it's quite easy to underestimate quite how hard it is to pull that sort of thing off. Like Roger Moore in The Saint, people say that he's just playing himself, and yet with both Simon Templar and John Steed we notice that the several attempts to revive the shows featuring them have often fallen down because the actors playing those parts have not quite been able to summon this supposedly simple appeal. Even the new Avengers, stuck as it sometimes seems between the light fantasy of the 60s series and the gritty realism of the shows around it, and those which follow, relies heavily on this character being at the very heart of it, even if the actor himself often felt sidelined throughout those troubled couple of years it was in production. But we're getting way ahead of ourselves. The series that preceded the Avengers, and with which it shared a lot of its DNA, only ran for 13 half-hour episodes, all of which were made by ABC, and this show was called Police Surgeon, not to be confused with the 1970s American show of the same name starring Sam Groom. The short-lived British series, which was created by emigrant Canadian TV supremo Sidney Newman, who is of course a name to be reckoned with in the creation of the iconic TV series of the 1960s, and mostly produced by Leonard White, revolved around the character of Dr. Geoffrey Brent, who was, unsurprisingly, a police surgeon who worked for the Metropolitan Police, usually represented in the form of Inspector Landon, as played by John Warwick. Only one episode, the first, is currently known to exist of Police Surgeon, but because it is often mistakenly thought of as an actual prequel to the Avengers proper, rather than being its creative cousin, the episode is included in that box set as an extra. The episode is entitled Easy Money, and a young tearaway, Jim Clark, played by an almost ridiculously young-seeming Michael Crawford, who must have been around 18 at the time, manages to blag his way out of a charge of theft at the local Nick, where Dr. Geoffrey Brent, played rather sincerely by Ian Hendry, is also a familiar figure. There's a fair amount of sub-Dixon of Doc Green-style shenanigans at the local police station, some of it involving ineptitude, clumsiness, pools wins, and familiar exasperations about female police officers that would continue to trouble similar dramas for several decades yet, before Dr. Brent intercepts the young tearaway in a nearby local cafe, and through a very strongly written and performed two-handed scene that reminds the viewer of exactly the kind of kitchen sink dramas that were playing so well at the time, attempts, however futilely, to try and put this young lad back on the straight and narrow. And he almost succeeds too, and probably would have done if it wasn't for... well, never mind. It's not exactly the actions of a diabolical mastermind that are being combated here, but great oaks and all that. In the cafe setting there are some tense moments which lead to some studio choreographed conflict involving a group of 3 teddy boys, as the credits put it, which couldn't help but make me think that this played in some way very much like a scene from a very, very early episode of Last of the Summer Wine, made when Blaymire, Compo and Clegg were young hooligans, but that's just a flight of fancy on my part. But the key thing, I think, for you to take from that episode is just how very, very good indeed Ian Hendry is in it. All around him there are some acting performances that can only be described as less than stellar, but right at the heart of it, there he is, rock solid, dependable, and giving it his quite stunningly brilliant all, and an absolute future superstar in the making. You can immediately see why, when it came to the Avengers, he was kept on, although I think it's probably fairer to say that ABC were more than eager to build another show around him for him to star in. Ingrid Hafner, who played Amanda Gibbs in one episode of Police Surgeon, obviously caught an eye or two, and would also be retained for the new series to play nurse and receptionist Carol Wilson, a character who worked at the doctor's surgery run by Dr. Tredding, Keel's rarely seen or discussed partner in general practice, who was played by a pipe-smoking Philip Stone in the first couple of episodes before vanishing and never being seen again. The series, which was dubbed The Avengers by Sidney Newman, although it is claimed that he didn't really know what it meant but that he just thought it was a good title, would continue for 6 seasons throughout the 60s, go through numerous changes in style and characters, and clock up 161 episodes before bowing out in May 1969. So, 1 month after saying goodbye to Ian Hendry as Dr. Geoffrey Brent, on the 7th of January 1961, viewers were introduced to Ian Hendry playing Dr. David Keel, a GP working in Tredding's medical practice, who, following a personal tragedy, gets roped into exciting adventures involving crime fighting and espionage, often but not exclusively thanks to those interventions I mentioned earlier from co-star John Steed. In Hot Snow, the opening episode written by Ray Rigby and based upon a story by Patrick Brown, we are, albeit briefly, introduced to Keel's fiancée Peggy, as played by Catherine, spelt with a C here, but more usually spelt with a K, Woodville, an actress who would later be married to Patrick Macnee for several years, and who also appeared in an episode of the original series of Star Trek, For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky. Very shortly after we meet the briefly happy couple, due to a mix-up with the delivery of a consignment of heroin to a different and far dodgier Dr. Tredding, Peggy is horribly murdered outside a jeweller's shop as the happy couple pick out an engagement ring by Godfrey Quigley playing Spicer, the wall-climbing, surgery-intruding, rifle-toting, and by some margin gruffest member of a rather peculiar gang of Kenneth Williams channeling drug smugglers, and after this horrible development in his life, Dr. Keel vows to avenge her death by bringing these lowlives to justice. Again, it's hardly the diabolical masterminds of later seasons, but it does serve to give some meaning to that Avengers title, which hardly ever comes up again, and despite the strangely camp villains we see, this comes across as being quite a seedy tale of drug addicts, murder, double-dealing and deception, at the climax of which Spicer does eventually meet his own grisly fate, and after which Dr. Keel is advised by a police officer to leave the crime fighting to the police, although, as he points out, the work isn't finished yet, and consequently the entire basis for a series is born. In his quest for justice, he has been aided, of course, by a shady and mysterious figure who seems to be working for the government in some vague capacity, guess who? And in the second episode, brought to book, the second half of that most rare of things, a sort of two-part episode of the Avengers, they do indeed manage to avenge Peggy's death even more fully by bringing down the head of the gang, and a lasting crime-fighting bond is formed between the two leads that lasts for, well, at least that 1 year of production. And it really is very nearly a year. Sometimes new episodes appear fortnightly, and the 26-part run, starting in January, remember, does not conclude until very late in December that same year. No wonder they felt shattered at the end of it. After subsequent episodes involving forgers, a fake MI5 agent, and a political kidnapping, the earliest complete episode that still exists is the 6th, first broadcast on the 11th of February 1961 and called Girl on the Trapeze. It was written by Dennis Spooner and is an episode which features our old favourite and rather ubiquitous actor Edwin Richfield, another television guest perennial Ivor Salter, with Howard Gorney playing Superintendent Lewis, who apparently has a streaming cold for medical reasons for Dr. Keel to get involved in the plot fans, and future Avengers perennial Kenneth J. Warren playing Zibbo, alongside, because of the studio lights, a particularly sweaty and, for this week at least, solo Dr. Keel, in an adventure full of intrigue involving the suspicious death of a girl who worked at a touring Russian circus after he involves himself after witnessing her apparent suicide by jumping in the river. In this episode, which features a larger-than-usual piece of the action for Carol, damsels in distress are rescued and big circusy fights are fought in an episode that really seems to enjoy using the trappings of its circus setting, and also uses Dr. Keel's medical skills very much in order to further the plot, which I'm sure happened quite a lot, but it's obviously difficult to be absolutely certain. Further escapades follow, in which our heroes battle diamond smugglers, missing isotopes, arson, the missing proceeds of a huge robbery, the theft of top-secret files, domestic murder, microdots, and networks helping prisoners to escape, until we come to the episode which was, for many years, all that survived from that first series. This was the episode broadcast in the 15th slot on the 27th of May and called The Frighteners, an episode written by Barclay Mather, which is all about the taking down of a gang run by a sinister figure known as the Deacon, played by Willoughby Goddard, later to play our favourite heavyweight in the mind of Mr. J.G. Reader, who are hired to put the Frighteners on certain characters who are considered unsavoury or inconvenient enough to their enemies to require sorting out by these violent third parties so as not to filthy their own lily-white hands with the whole messy business. In this episode they are hired by another favourite in the heftiness department, one Stratford Johns, who is using some frankly terrible parenting skills to scare off a feckless work-shy fop from troubling his daughter. Actually, he's a conning work-shy fop amongst other work-shy fops in the person of an on-screen appearance for Philip Gilbert as Jeremy de Willoughby, later the voice of Tim in The Tomorrow People. In this episode, Philip Locke is threatened that he'll drop dead from a broken neck he doesn't have, and he and the Deacon are threatened with the old fake deadly hypodermic needle trick first practiced by Dr. Keel in episode 2, with Dr. Keel's medical knowledge helping to add a much-needed human element to this underworld drama in which Steed's blend of being both charmer and torturer can be seen in equal measure, and we get a glimpse of the more dapper figure he would later become, especially in the flower cellar sequence. Justice over some double-dealing duplicity is ultimately served in all strands, and the episode concludes with a rather surprising twist, if you're not expecting it anyway, thanks to one of Dr. Keel's actress friends. There's even the use of a taxi as an HQ, which would later serve David Callan well when he briefly becomes head of the section. And we also get a glimpse of future Sam Seeley, Neil Wilson, as an Italian deli owner who's handy with a meat slicer, but his stereotypical performance is offset by glimpses of an actual ethnic minority and a police constable, both very rare in Avengers land, in the early part of the episode. When I was collecting the videotapes of old Avengers episodes a decade or more ago, during a time that involved my brief period of interaction with the whole messy business of bidding on eBay for them, a copy of The Frighteners from what was known as the Evolution collection became something of a holy grail for me, even though I ended up with a couple of copies of it as I tried to piece together the entire second series across several disparate releases. The series continues, with more international concerns which next trouble our avenging heroes as a coup is attempted in an African state, before submarine espionage troubles them closer to home, followed by another diamond robbery, and a call girl racket drawing their attention, all of which I mentioned to show the diverse nature of the threats with which our heroes were dealing. The interesting thing about Studio Canal, the company that currently appears to hold all the rights of the Avengers, is that they do seem rather reluctant to allow much in the way of original fiction based around the characters and concepts, and are very, very protective of their product, as indeed they should be. However, what this means is that when Big Finish got the license to produce the Avengers in audio form around a decade ago, all that they were allowed to do was recreate the stories, both missing and otherwise, from that first series. And it was the chance to finally hear that series in some form, and in as near as it seemed it might ever get to its entirety, that actually brought this customer back into the worlds of Big Finish after more than half a decade away. Anyway, what this means is that over the course of 7 rather enjoyable box sets, the entire 26 episodes of that first series were recreated starring Anthony Howell and Julian Wadham in the main roles. They've since gone on to adapt stories which appeared in several other media like comic strips and original fiction at the time of the original series, but original new stories still seem to be off the table, no matter how much the Big Finish writers are having to push the envelope in order to recreate the legitimate lost ones. This is because for a great many of the episodes from that first series, surprisingly little remains other than the episode titles, broadcast dates, and much of this information can only be gleaned from the listings from old copies of the TV Times or from the newspapers of the time. Many of the scripts are lost completely, and several have only the sketchiest synopses, so building entire episodes from such fragments must be a tricky thing to do, especially when working with a licensee as protective of their product as Studio Canal appears to be. Even Dave Rogers, the author responsible for many of the publications that told the story of the Avengers to eager young fans back in the day, seems to get a little sketchy in his episode descriptions for several of these episodes in some of his books. However, what all this means is that the next, and most recently rediscovered episode, The Tunnel of Fear, written by John Cruise and first seen on the 5th of August 1961, was actually recreated by Big Finish before it was found and became available to be viewed, and so the differences between the plotting choices between the two versions are quite fascinating should you choose to compare and contrast. The original episode is largely set behind the scenes at a fairground in Southend. The episode opens with an escaped prisoner with the surprisingly dull name, in Avengers terms, of Harry Black, played by Murray Hayne, turning up at the surgery in need of attention, and, between bouts of enforced unconsciousness, he claims that he was framed. As the story unfolds, we briefly get to meet Steed's boss 110 a couple of times, as played by Douglas Muir. This is the only surviving chance we get from the first season to see him in action. Meanwhile, much like the episode set behind the scenes at the circus, the episode itself makes the most of the elements of its fairground setting, including dancing girls, hypnotism and ghost trains, and you genuinely start to get a slight sense of the more eccentric theme of the weak worlds that would become such a feature of the later series of the show. But we're not there just yet. This is a far more down-to-earth and at least vaguely realistic portrayal of the dark corners of the underworld that Dr. Keel and Steed inhabit, with, despite the villain in significantly the bowler hat, genuinely creepy characters and sinister villains being convincingly unpleasant and setting up innocent people to take the fall for crimes that they didn't commit. Steed also gets to enjoy himself a lot amongst a plethora of bikini-clad fairground girls whilst wearing a turban and working undercover as a fairground stallholder, which has to be seen to be believed, really. We also get to meet Harry's mum, one of those lovely dotty eccentrics as played by Doris Rogers, which is another of those delightful cameos that later series would place very much front and centre of the series. It's also got Maurice Perry in it, and displays a fair amount of the exposed jiggling flesh of young women as the plot unfolds, which probably titillated the viewers quite considerably on that Saturday evening all those years ago. The Tunnel of Fear is, of course, the ghost train, where most of the criminal plotting, hypnotism being used to make otherwise innocent people commit break-ins, is being hatched, using a cutting-edge, high-tech computer that needs to be seen to be believed, and a bluff with an explosive cigarette, although alongside all of these spy shenanigans, there's some quite poignant family moments along the way that manage to drive a surprisingly touching subplot which remind us that, at the very heart of early Avengers, there are several social issues being addressed. 6 more adventures follow for Dr. Keel and John Steed, including heading off to, presumably, a studio-bound depiction of Mexico, which very likely might prove troubling to modern viewers if it had survived. Combating fraud amongst emergency rations intended for victims of a cyclone, political assassinations, the rebirth of fascism in 1960s London, stolen experimental vaccines, seriously ill banana salesmen, and research into radiation, many of which still sound more than a little topical 60 years later, before their partnership comes to a disappointingly premature end, because, from what there is available to see, their adventures were actually well written, well performed, well made, and rather a lot of fun for what was basically a studio-bound adventure series recorded at least as live around 60 years ago. Back in the day, production of that first television season was interrupted and ultimately somewhat reduced by a television strike, which gave Ian Hendry the opportunity to escape from both his contract and the series itself and pursue a film career, a career path incidentally imitated decades later, perhaps with far less grace and far more ill-feeling, by David Caruso on NYPD Blue. Ian Hendry's film career included several undoubted classics like The Hill and Get Carter, so you can hardly blame him for trying to capitalise on his good looks and lead actor status in an era where such things would later serve people like Sean Connery, Michael Caine and, albeit far later on, Roger Moore very well, although with the direction the British film industry was ultimately headed for not yet clearly signposted, you can't help but wonder whether it was the best career path for him to have chosen. After all, in the 60s, Patrick McGoohan, Roger Moore of course, and even Patrick Macnee did very well out of remaining in television and could even be considered to be huge television stars, despite only one of them probably making it to genuine film star status. That said, Ian Hendry was always popping up regularly as a guest star in several of the usual film series made for television in the 1960s and 70s like Danger Man, The Saint, The Persuaders and later series like Van der Valk and Bergerac, but departing the Avengers just before it transformed into a phenomenon might very well have been one of those things that kept him up late at night for the rest of his life. A decade and a half later, after a career that somehow never quite managed to soar quite so high again, albeit one which included several lead roles in high-profile drama series like The Lotus Eaters and For Maddie with Love, Ian Hendry would return to Avengers Land in a slightly nostalgic and melancholy episode of The New Avengers entitled To Catch a Rat. He did not reprise Dr. Keel, but there was an oblique acknowledgement to him in Steed's parting line to his character, "It may be 17 years late, but welcome back, Gunnar." Ian Hendry died at the age of 53 on Christmas Eve 1984, a mere 23 years after that memorable series in which he starred ended. But we remain eternally grateful that he was there right at the beginning, more than 60 years ago, to introduce us all to the phenomenon that was, and is, the Avengers.
Many thanks to Martin for that article.
Indeed, Martin's show, Vision on Sound, is available every Sunday from Fab Radio International at 7 o'clock, and there's a podcast version available soon after on Anchor FM.
Indeed.
Talking about the Avengers, Simon and Ken from the Exton Moss Experiment have a new show where they're working their way through the Avengers, Kinky Boots, and that's on SoundCloud.
Right.
But now, Paul and Toppie find that they're
lost in space.
You ought to be ashamed of yourself, playing your tape recorder at a time like this. Music always helps me when I'm sad. I'd like you all to hear something.
We are rationing our power, my dear. You're needlessly wasting a perfectly good battery.
You'll find this very interesting.
This is the robot speaking. I have a message for my friends. Dear ones, I realize the problem which faces you. I understand the brave fight you have made to survive on this planet. Rather than place you in further danger, I have made a decision.
Hello, Round the Archives people. It's me, Paul the Shy Yeti. How you doing? I'm all right. I've got Toppie Smellie here today. How are you doing, Toppie?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's good to have you back. Now, this time, because this edition of Round the Archives is 60s themed, we're going to talk about a show that we both like, but I know you're particularly fond of it, Lost in Space, the 60s version.
Yay. Yeah, 60s version. Let's do it.
Yeah, ran from 1965 to 1968, 3 seasons. And there were 83 episodes, 29 in black and white, and 54 in colour. And now, I don't tell me if I'm being rude, but I just wondered, would you have been old enough to have seen it? By the end, like season 3, would you have been old enough for season 3?
Yes, I would have. And I think I was tuning into it. I was certainly tuning into the show that was competing with it, which was Batman. And I would have been around 3 or 4. But I do remember watching Batman, and I remember watching Lost in Space. So that would have been when it was actually airing. But what I really remember, much more than that, was when Lost in Space went into syndication, and perhaps a station would play it every afternoon at 4 o'clock. And that's when I really saw them over and over and over again. So it was when it was in syndication that that's where most of my memories and nostalgia for the show are from.
But jumping to the end of it here, but only because I read something today which I didn't know. Well, partly that there was almost a season 4. In fact, the cast thought there was going to be a season 4, and the ratings and things had gone down. But apparently, the thing that really swung it as to not bring it back was that the early seasons were kind of like more of a family, like the family was watching, and I think it was something to do with the advertisers were happy whilst it was a family audience, because it's the adults that are going to be spending.
Right, that was the preferred market at the time. Yeah.
But by season 3, their demographics were definitely more just kids, and the advertisers were like, well,
yeah. It's not surprising, considering the direction of the show, which just kept getting sillier and sillier. It's no wonder kids loved it. It was very fantasy and fairy tale oriented by the time it ended. It's no wonder kids were the main people who watched. Whereas in the beginning, it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe when you see those older episodes, season 3, that it actually started as a very serious space drama. And I can't think of another television series that had such a dramatic change of direction than Lost in Space.
I was definitely inspired by the sort of the middle period where there was a monster of the week, and often that seemed to involve a man with stockings over his head. We were so inspired that when we did our Sutton Park, I remember getting Harry to wear the curvy bit of an Easter egg box, and put that over his face to give him a sort of domed face, and then borrowing a pair of my mum's tights and getting him to stick his head in it, and that was our ode to a Lost in Space monster.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it'll turn up. We do have it. But it's obviously it's not even up to the Lost in Space standards.
Yeah. By the way, the thing that was really scary about those guys with stockings over their heads was the noises they made. Do you remember? It was sort of like, it was this groaning. It was really spooky.
We will go. I think we'll go through the cast in a minute, but I just wanted to say that sort of thematically, season 1 is a mixture of the spaceship sort of traveling and sometimes being stuck on a planet for a while and then traveling a bit. Whereas season 2, they're stuck on a planet for pretty much the whole time. Unless they have an episode where they're zapped off for some reason.
Yeah, actually, for most of season 1, they're stuck on Prius, which is the name that they give the planet. But the first half dozen or more episodes, they were out there in space and traveling around. And then they landed on Prius, and pretty much the rest of the season, they were stuck there. And then I think season 2, Prius blew up. Prius was having some real problems, and they had to lift off, and Prius self-destructed. And they did a little bit in space, not really very much. And no sooner than they had finished getting out of Prius, they crash landed on another planet, and the entire second season was them stuck on a planet. Now, season 3, I think they had kind of gotten like a lot of feedback from viewers who said, can we do something more than just sit around on a planet? Season 3, they actually did a lot in space. Yeah. And they were going round and round to different places. As a matter of fact, you know how Star Trek had transporters. Yeah. And they had this huge ship up in the space, and the way they'd get down was to transport. Well, Lost in Space decided we want to keep them up in space. So how do they get down? If they're going to go on a planet, how the hell do they get down there? So they came up, all of a sudden, lo and behold, this whole time they had this little space shuttle that had been there the whole time, only we never saw it until season 3. And so that's how, in season 3, they got their way down to different planets to have different adventures without actually landing the Jupiter 2.
I know it's the silliest of the seasons, but I'm very fond of season 3 because it's quite varied and also very much a product of its time. Like they have space hippies because it was made in '68.
Yes.
And hippies were very popular.
And by the way, you haven't seen anything until you've seen actor Jonathan Harris, who portrayed Dr. Smith so brilliantly. If you haven't seen anything until you've seen Jonathan Harris do a hippie.
and Jonathan Harris was also, after Lost in Space had finished, they gave him a guest spot on the second season of Land of the Giants, which I think was sort of made the year after. And he plays a piper in that one. But,
yeah, I gotta see that again. Oh, see, now I'm an Irwin Allen nut, Paul. I love all of these things he did in these few years. It started with Voyage Under the Sea, which was quite successful, and actually, Irwin Allen sold Lost in Space on the basis of the fact that, look, I've got this smash hit. It's airing right now on CBS. It's making them a lot of money. Why don't you take a chance on this new thing I've got about people in space? So, and then for a while, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and Lost in Space were being produced at the same time.
And then Time Tunnel. I think they had three things going at once at one point.
You're right. All of those Irwin Allen things, I was right on board. I loved them all.
We'll get back to Lost in Space imminently, but I was just going to say that Voyage does go from very serious to pretty silly. I don't think it ever gets as silly as Lost in Space with carrot monsters, but it gets pretty silly. And Time Tunnel was pretty serious, relatively, and Land of the Giants is relatively serious.
Pretty serious, yeah.
But then the episode I was watching today, which I will talk about in a bit, it does, because the robot and Will and Dr. Smith, they are, but it's definitely the show with the most comedy in it. Just the way they interact, it's very funny at times.
As I mentioned before, the show underwent a dramatic change in style and what they were going for. Originally, it was serious sci-fi stuff. All right, and then as a response, in particular, to the massive success of the Batman TV series, which was just campy as hell, just silly and massively popular, they got the idea that how are we going to compete with this? And in a fairly short period of time, they just went right over to the camp on Lost in Space. Now, like I said before, I don't think there's ever been a TV series that changed that fast from serious sci-fi to camp. I can't think of any other show that did a change like that.
We should go through the list of characters. The main characters. So we've got Professor John Robinson, and he's the father of the family. And then we've got Dr. Maureen Robinson, his wife. Guy Williams plays John Robinson, and June Lockhart plays Maureen Robinson. So she's the mother of the family. Then we have the pilot of the Jupiter 2, Major Don West, played by Mark Goddard.
Right, and he's not part of the family. He's the pilot supplied by, oh God, they had a name for the space thing. I can't remember what they called it, but he was the pilot provided to the family.
Sort of has a sort. I don't know if they ever go beyond. I'm sure there's a sort of vague romantic connection with Judy Robinson, who's the oldest daughter. But
I don't think it was vague.
Was it more? I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure. I couldn't remember.
Yeah, especially the first season, they pushed it a little.
Yeah.
And then after that, it didn't really seem to matter. But that first season, they were really pushing the idea that Don, the pilot, who was not a member of the family, and here they are all by themselves. Yeah. And that something was going on with their eldest daughter, Judy, and Don. And I remember Maureen and Dr. Robinson going like, well, nature's going to take its course.
They're the only hope for that family beyond, if they get stranded on that planet forever, they're the only two who aren't related to each other.
Yeah.
Other than Dr. Smith, and I don't think he's going to be impregnating anybody. But,
no. We'll have a lot to say about Dr. Smith.
Judy Robinson was played by Marta Kristen. And then the youngest daughter was Penny Robinson, who's the sort of middle child. She's played by Angela Cartwright. And she's about the age, she's supposed to be about 11 when the series starts, whereas I suppose Judy Robinson is.
She grew up fast. Penny did. I mean, the actress. She just happened to be there, when girls mature. Like, boom. She's like, oh my God, like a foot taller, and she changes a lot during the series. Unlike Will, who pretty much seems to keep looking like the little kid he started out as. Yeah, although you can see that he's aging.
He was supposed to be about 9 at the start of the series. I'm not sure. He was played by Billy Mooney.
Yes. And we know that Billy Mooney, along with Dr. Smith and the robot, who we'll talk about more, really became the center three characters of the show.
Yeah, so Dr. Zachary Smith, played by Jonathan Harris, he is the sort of flight surgeon in the first episode.
Right. The same space company that gave them the pilot, Donald West, also had a doctor, Zachary Smith.
Yeah, and he's a sort of enemy agent in the first episode and causes all the partly causes all the problems.
It turns out he's a spy. They never name the nation that he's spying for, but you kind of like it. Just you just sort of feel like it's Russia. Who else would it be? But they never say it's Russia. They never say who he's spying for. But it's right off the bat, Dr. Smith is a spy. And those early episodes with Dr. Smith, he's evil. He's really evil. And he's not kidding around either.
Yeah. Am I right in saying, and I'm sure, I think I am, it's probably on my DVD set, but there was a pilot episode and there were certain characters missing, and I think there was no Dr. Smith in the pilot? Yeah.
No, there wasn't. So this is kind of the same thing happened to Star Trek. They made a pilot. They spent all this money and they filmed and produced a pilot that never aired. It was reused later in a 2-part episode of Star Trek called The Menagerie. But the same thing happened to Lost in Space. They spent an unprecedented amount of money producing a pilot that had top-notch special effects, and it never aired. I don't know why that happened, because it was good stuff. At any rate, what ended up happening is in that pilot episode, there's no Dr. Smith. And I don't think there's a robot either. And it's basically about this family that merrily goes along in space with little conflict. And I think what producers and the network thought was, well, where's the conflict? What this family gets along too well. Something's gotta, there's gotta be something where there's conflict. And that's when Dr. Smith was conceived as the nemesis that would provide the conflict. But even then, he wasn't going to be around all that long in the first season. They kind of were going to get rid of him. And Jonathan Harris, what happened is, they had this unaired pilot, a lot of footage, right? So they really quite brilliantly, as they started doing episode 1, episode 2, they used the footage from the pilot, and in brilliant editing and like figuring it all out, they pieced together all that pilot footage. It never went to waste in episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And so that footage was eventually used, but they artfully had to insert Dr. Smith, and they had to insert the robot. And somehow it worked. I mean, they did a really good job in reconfiguring this whole thing. And they saved a lot of money by using almost everything from the pilot episode that was never aired in the first 6 episodes. And it's really quite, you look at those episodes and what you see is like a gigantic budget, which they had. They had a gigantic budget. It was the most expensive TV series going. Remember the chariot traveling around, and then it goes on the ice, and then it's in the water, it's in the ocean, and they're splashing around in the, oh my God, that was miniature work that was good enough to be in a movie. It was so well done. Also, the first time the Jupiter 2 crashes is, oh my God, it's a miniature crash, and it is done so well, you would swear. Even today, looking at it, it holds up. The spacewalking scene in episode 2 or 3, where John Robinson is out there outside of the Jupiter 2, and he's got a rope, and he's he's frantically, I forget what the hell he's trying to do, but he's out there spacewalking. Those scenes where he's spacewalking and weightless, my God, it's amazing how well they did that. Anyways, what I'm saying is they spent a lot of money and a lot of time making that pilot, and those scenes wound up in the first 6 episodes or so, and you just saw amazing things, amazing special effects, amazing miniature model work. It was top notch.
One of the fun things, and I can't remember if they do this on Voyage as well, or is at the end of the episode, the story finishes, and then there's a 5-minute to, well, something like 3 or 4 minute scene, which is the beginning of the next story, and then it ends on a cliffhanger. So you get a cliffhanger every week, which
Irwin Allen apparently loved the cliffhanger. I mean, he loved it, and that's why the first 2 seasons have that pattern. No sooner do they finish the story, that last few minutes when they come back from a commercial, they're, all of a sudden, something new's happening. And in like a minute or two, it ends with some ridiculous cliffhanger where something explodes or whatever happens.
Yeah, the one I watched today involved lots of explosions, and then they go outside, and then these rocks part, and there's this strange red creature with a big bulbous head, and it's squeezing something, and it kind of, and then Dr. Smith goes all sort of negative green, and then it's like, well, next episode.
Yeah.
I think in the 3rd season they just had like clips from the next episode.
Yeah, they dropped that. They also had a brand new theme song.
Yeah, we liked I think we agreed that we liked the second theme more than the first.
Yeah, it's by John Williams, who of course went on to superstardom, doing the score for Jaws, Close Encounters.
Yeah, the early title sequence is all animation, but the 3rd season is more like photos and
that animated stuff was like it's just was a style that was used a lot at that time. A lot of shows had that animated stuff, and then suddenly it seemed old, and so they said, "Oh, we got to jazz this up. Nobody's doing this animated stuff anymore." So they jazzed up the theme and gave it a new opening, which I love. I love it tons better.
I imagine. I having only seen one episode, I'm not 100% sure, but I've seen more. But recently, in the early seasons, I guess there's like a pre-title sequence. Now I don't know if is that a recap of that cliffhanger from the end of the previous episode. I guess it probably is, and then it goes into the title sequence. Whereas in the 3rd season, it just starts because there hasn't been a cliffhanger from the previous episode, and then it goes into what I remember. It goes into like a countdown, 3, 2, 1, and into the title.
See, I thought that was brilliant. Yeah, they'd have this preamble at the beginning, and something exciting would happen, and all of a sudden there's a freeze frame, and then you'd get 7, 5, 6, 4, and the theme, which thrilled me.
We were quite. I mean, I was a lot older than you would have been. I don't know when the first time it was shown in the UK. But in the late 80s, probably into the early 90s, they went through showing all of the Irwin Allen shows. Actually, I say that, they mainly showed Lost in Space and Land of the Giants because it was a while before. They did eventually show Voyage to the Sea, but they didn't show them in chronology. They obviously went for Lost in Space first, because I think they probably thought it was the most. But this was like sort of Sunday morning, sort of, I can't even remember whether it was after lunch. But anyway, that's when I first saw it in the late 80s. So I was sort of,
which is decades later than when I saw it. How did it strike you? I mean, when you were looking, did it seem? How did it seem to you? Like really old fashioned, or you loved it? Or
I liked it because it was just because I liked it because I liked the 60s anyway, and I was a Doctor Who fan already, so I was quite sort of. I think it's probably more of a one where not all of my Doctor Who friends would have watched it just because it was TV. Because
actually, there's no comparison to the sci-fi that was in Doctor Who to the what became the monster of the week goofiness of Lost in Space. They were too very different things.
They were probably aimed at similar family audience. At times, Doctor Who ended up probably being a little bit more childish than adult, and then some it went through an era where it was probably more adult than kids. Doctor Who did, and so in the same way as Lost in Space had a fluctuating audience. Although with Lost in Space, it was more family, kids. Whereas Doctor Who's was a bit more complicated than that because it went on for 26 years the first time round. So it went through different sorts of eras. But they also is quite well known for its sort of catchphrases, mainly the robot and and you still hear people say this to this day, "Danger, danger, Will Robinson," and Dr. Smith had various different insults for the robot.
Lost in Space is very much remembered for these things. Warning, warning from the robot. It does not compute from the robot. And of course, danger, Will Robinson. And then Dr. Smith was like, "You bubble-headed booby, you cackling cacophony, you tin-plated traitor, you blithering blatherskite, and traitorous transistorized toad." Now, famously, actor Jonathan Harris, who knew his character was boring at the beginning, and this was a good paycheck for him, okay? And he said to himself, got to do something here. That I've got such a loser character. What can I do to make sure my character stays around? And completely without permission, he didn't ask anybody. He just started to improvise. And that's when the character of Dr. Smith caught fire. And it was completely because Harris just started ad-libbing his lines. And that's when he came up with the bubble-headed booby. And none of that was written for him. He just came up with it.
And he used to do the pain.
Yes, that was
doing that
one.
in the episode that I watched today.
Mm-hmm. And, it was so successful that by the time people caught on to what he was doing, the ratings were good and the response from the audience was good, that all they could really do was like, okay, I know what you're doing, all right? But they couldn't stop it. And Dr. Smith became the most pivotal character on the show, which was never, ever intended. It wasn't intended ever. As a matter of fact, both the parent roles by Lockhart and what's-his-face, they resented this terribly because they thought they were the stars, right? They do have head billing, but that didn't end up mattering. The breakout star was Jonathan Harris. The breakout star was the robot.
Apparently, Guy Williams retired after Lost in Space.
Well, yeah, he did not have a good time on that show, mostly because he felt overshadowed. Well, he thought he was climbing on board a serious science fiction show, and it ended up being so silly. June Lockhart and he just were banned several times. They were just basically said, "Don't come to the next two shows we're doing," because they couldn't stop laughing at the stupid script. It was so silly to them, they couldn't keep a straight face in the films. And to punish them, they said, we're writing you out of the next two episodes, and you're not going to get paid. That's how they punished him.
Now, time is rapidly passing, but I wanted to mention very briefly an episode that is a favourite of mine, but then there's an episode that I know is a favourite of yours, which is the one that I watched again today. So very quickly, the one that sticks in my head, and it's not to say that there isn't lots of the season one is wonderful, and the black and white is so good in it. But there's an episode from season 3 called Space Creature, where Will wishes that he was by himself, and it's one of the episodes that when they're in space, they're flying, and one by one people vanish. And I was intending to rewatch that one as well, but I didn't have the time. But that's one that stuck in my head.
And then there's they sort of reappear, and they're in this nebulous kind of fog. And it's very Twilight Zone-y, really.
Yeah,
with the unusual, like Will everyone disappears and he's suddenly alone on the Jupiter 2. There's nobody else around. And he can't figure out where the hell did everybody go? Is he going insane or whatever? And it's very Twilight Zone-y.
The one that we're going to talk in a little bit more depth about is a favourite of yours, which I rewatched today, called Trip Through the Robot. And now this is like season 2, but it's like the 26th of 30 episodes.
So it's towards the end.
Really near the end of the season. And I read up today, and it was saying that it was a kind of script that they kept for sort of spare, and when they decided to make it, it used lots of leftover props and things. But as we were saying before we started recording it, you wouldn't know that from watching it, because it's basically they aren't shrunk down, but the robot is gets bigger and they have to go inside to repair it. And,
they go. The robot grows huge, and of course they want to fix it. They want to get the robot back to normal. So Will, who's accompanied by our wonderful Dr. Smith, they undo a panel under his treads to enter the robot and fix him, which of course he does not have permission to do from his father. And he's been warned to stay away from this area. At any rate, he gets in there, and we have this wonderful scenery of them walking through the robot. And like the human body has antibodies to fight germs, the robot has this wandering weapon that's supposed to shoot and destroy anything that intrudes the inside. And they have to keep evading that, and they keep making their way closer and closer to the robot's so-called heart or center. And that's where Will gets out his toolbox, and we have this great set of this mechanical heart. And anyways, it's brilliant. And then Will is successful, and he gets the robot corrected, and it starts to shrink. Except they're still inside. And the robot keeps shrinking, and Will and Dr. Smith have to get the hell out of there. But meanwhile, his father and Don have entered the robot as well, searching for him. All of them are trapped in a robot that's shrinking. It's brilliant.
There's also some very funny bits early on that had me chuckling, because it starts off that at the start of the episode, there's been a big explosion, and the ship's been a little bit damaged, and the robot needs to be charging, but they can't risk doing it. So the robot sort of takes himself off into the desert of the planet to sort of, and he's sort of wandering through. He's sort of quoting bits of Shakespeare, and then he also leaves a message. Somehow he must have nipped back to record a message, because Penny kind of says, "Oh look, he left a message for us," and the robot's kind of going, "Don't miss me," and all that sort of thing. It's very, very campy in a funny way.
Along with the show changing its timbre from really serious to what became campy, the robot character started out as very sinister and very black and white. It was a villain. And as the show progressed, somehow everyone realized that, I don't know how it happened. I think it happened as an offshoot of Dr. Smith ad-libbing, and there just started to be this humorous exchange between the robot and Dr. Smith. But I mean, you watch the robot at the beginning of the series, it's nothing at all like what the robot became. And whether you love it or not, that trio of Dr. Smith, the robot, and Will became the pivotal characters in this series. And the humor and the genuine affection that Will Robinson had for the robot and the robot had for Will.
It really chimed with me, because in my other job as head of the Shy Life podcast, we have a character called Cuthbert, which is played by an internet site which does a robot voice. But I found that the good thing about having Cuthbert in the show is that he sounds like a robot and he's unemotional. But if you write him saying emotional things, or I often have him saying, I love you, everyone, goodbye, whatever. And I don't know if it works for everybody else, but it works for me. It's even though he doesn't have much emotion, if he says emotional things, and when I was watching today, I was thinking, I wonder if I was probably inspired a bit by the robot from Lost in Space without even realizing it, because they do a very similar thing, and I would have, he's a character that I've known for just over 30 years when I first saw Lost in Space.
So a lot of people remembering Lost in Space. There's a definite division between the camps of appreciators. A lot of them just prefer the straight sci-fi black and white episodes from the first 10 episodes, and a lot of people can't help not love the goofiness of how it ended up, especially with season 3. And I know this is one of your favorites, Paul. Dr. Smith turns into a carrot.
Yeah.
You can't get any campier than that episode.
It's one of the first shows I got on DVD. It's not one I play every, loads and loads, and I'm sure there's some episodes I haven't even rewatched again yet, but I knew I needed it in my collection because it was definitely a fondness for it.
I have too, and I think I really love the earnestness of the first season. I love the money they put into the special effects and the models, because it's as good as any movie you're ever going to see. The stuff in that first season, the special effects. But I also really love how dopey it became. So, I don't know. I love the whole damn thing.
Yeah. Well, we could talk about Lost in Space all day, and there's been movies. There's currently, I think it's still running, a reboot that's run for a number of seasons, but we haven't got time for that really today. But
I've enjoyed the reboot on Netflix, and there's been 2 seasons. They say there's going to be a third, but I haven't heard a word about it yet. But I hope they do it, and they've also promised the 3rd season is going to be the last season. Yeah.
If we wait a year or two, then we can. I think, to be fair, I have talked about some episodes of Neighbours from only about 2 years ago, so I'm sure we can talk about the new series one day. Anyway, Toppie, thank you very much for talking with me about Lost in Space, and
I enjoyed it. For a series that only ran for some 83 episodes, we sure did have a lot to talk about. So,
well, thanks, Andrew and Lisa, for letting us talk again, and hopefully we'll be invited back again to talk about something else.
Well, I hope so. If we didn't scare them off, well, maybe we'll be back.
Well, we'll hand back to Andrew and Lisa, and we'll say goodbye for now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
My power is at an end. I cannot continue. But I must.
Many thanks to Paul and Toppie for that.
Yes, thank you, boys.
Toppie, of course, is on the Smellcast and Matinee Minutia, and Paul is on the Shy Life podcast.
And Vision on Sound.
Yeah. But now, here's you and me looking at
Sergeant Cork.
Happy Christmas, Lisa.
Happy Christmas, Andrew.
Now, let's go back to 1963.
Okay.
Christmas 1963.
Yeah.
Now, I guess for most sort of Doctor Who fans, you might think, well, 28th of December is a Saturday between Christmas and New Year.
Yes.
Episode 2 of the first Dalek serial. So you get to see the Daleks for the first time.
You do.
That's quite exciting, isn't it? But I think sometimes Doctor Who fans don't see the wood for the trees, do they?
No.
So let's just look at what was on BBC One after that. The Telegoons, The Choking Horror.
Yeah.
Okay, we've appeared on the Telegoons. Not on the Telegoons. We haven't appeared on the Telegoons. I'm not a puppet.
No, you're not.
No, but we've appeared on the Goon Show podcast.
Yes.
News and Weatherman, Jukebox Jury, which we'll skip over. Dixon of Dock Green, Mrs. Conroy's Gold Mine, written by David Ellis. A series created by Ted Willis, you know. Yeah. Wells Fargo, New Orleans Trackdown. Never seen Wells Fargo. No. It's some cowboy thing.
Yes.
Saturday film, Lost Treasure of the Amazon. Comedy Playhouse The Bed by Ronald Wolfe and Ronald Chesney with Thor Hurd and Freddie Frinton.
Yes.
News Sport. I think that means news and sport.
Yeah.
And the final edition of That Was the Week That Was, or as it's listed, That Was the Year That Was.
Okay.
Brackets, it is regretted that no ticket applications can be considered for this show. That's because we're not making it in 1964.
Okay.
None of that's particularly Christmassy, is it?
No.
Not really.
No. I mean, this is the point where I don't think you have quite as many specialised Christmassy programmes as you do now.
No, and really the case in point is Sergeant Cork that night.
Yes. So it's the
start of season 2.
Season 2, yeah.
Or wherever you refer to Sergeant Cork. Although seasons are a bit sort of vague with
nebulous.
Sergeant Cork, aren't they?
Yes.
Sergeant Cork, aren't they?
Yes.
The case of the Fenian men. Now I've got the case number here because Sergeant Cork's always got a case number, and it's file number 4518.
Yeah.
Now there's this joke that like Z Cars at Christmas does special Christmas crimes with holly in their helmets and things like that, as Old Man Steptoe says.
Yeah.
Sergeant Cork presents what is one of the most un-Christmassy episodes of anything I've ever seen scheduled at this point in December.
Yes, I do wonder whether whoever decided to start the second series at this point actually viewed this episode. Because it's most unsuitable.
It really is, and as it's split into 3 parts because of the advert breaks, and each cliffhanger, as it were, gets worse than the one before.
Yeah.
But what's it say for TV times?
Right.
So Sergeant Cork is on that listing at 7:10.
7:10, but bearing in mind
may vary according to region.
Different regions would have had it at different times.
Yeah. So what's the blurb there?
It says it says Sergeant 7:10. Sergeant Cork, John Barry and William Galt in The Case of the Fenian Men by Bill Craig.
Yeah. What's the blurb at the bottom there?
Okay. So it says Cork investigating an abortive Fenian bomb outrage at the House of Commons is told by an informer that another treacherous attempt is planned. This time it's to be something very special.
Well, the fuller blurb on the network release says Sergeant Cork is assigned to a case involving the Fenian League, the American organisation dedicated to the overthrow of English rule in Ireland. After one abortive attempt to bomb the House of Commons, information is received that another assassination attempt is in the offing, and this time it's something very special. Written by Bill Craig, directed by Josephine Douglas, whose name I don't recognise.
I do recognise it, yeah. I've seen her on other things. Couldn't tell you exactly what without looking it up, but I have seen her.
But a lady directing...
Yeah.
Well, basically it's a massacre, isn't it? It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. We put the disc in, and it comes up with a picture of sort of Corky and William Gaunt, and I said they do look a little Laurel and Hardy, don't they?
Yeah. Or we should say John Barry and William Gaunt.
John Barry and William Gaunt.
Yeah.
But I could just imagine William Gaunt as sort of Stan Laurel putting his finger in his gob, blowing and making his hat go up and down, which would be funnier than anything that happens in this.
Yes, that wouldn't be hard though.
No. But we start off in a sort of funeral directors, don't we? Where there's a coffin being ominous, isn't it? Is it shot as an ominous coffin?
Maybe.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, CID are being moved, aren't they? So Sergeant Cork's getting a new...
Yeah,
I have to say office, not orifice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they're preparing the first floor, and all the CID chaps are going to be in together.
So. And Superintendent Rodway is coming, isn't he? Although he's not actually in this episode.
No.
But this funeral director's opening is very... It's very sort of Avengers-y, isn't it?
It is quite Avengers-y.
And indeed, there is an episode of the Avengers on that night, isn't there?
Yes.
Later on, because Sergeant Cork obviously is grim as hell this week. So the rest of the schedule is the Larkins, which I think has to do some heavy lifting to cheer the mood of the nation.
I think you're probably right.
Now, we should say this is the old Larkins, not the new Larkins, isn't it?
It would be difficult for it to be the new Larkins. Because I don't think many of the people that are in the new Larkins
But it's nothing to do with Darling Buds and May.
No. It's the Larkins with Piggy Mount and David Kossoff.
Yeah. And the Avengers is...
Dressed to Kill, which I think is the one on the train.
Yeah. Is that Annika Wills?
Yes.
Okay.
Annika Wills and Leonard Rossiter and Richard Leach and John Junkin and various other people. Yeah. Everybody seems to be dressed up.
Okay, fair enough.
So.
But yeah, Avengers are very good at like opening episodes in sort of places like funeral directors, aren't they? There's a Detective Sergeant Tovey has turned up.
Yes.
Who's a friend of Corky.
He is.
Although Corky doesn't like him referring to him as Corky, does he?
Not when Marriott's around, because it might give him ideas.
Yeah. But there's been a bomb attempt on the House of Commons, and it's put down to Fenian activity.
Yes.
And there is some talk of should the military get involved, and basically the police aren't really keen on that, are they?
No,
because
they'll end up taking over. I mean, also you should bear in mind that a lot of police superintendents at this point were ex-military
men. Yeah, I mean, we talked about this previously in our last look at Sergeant Cork, which was a long time ago now.
It was,
yeah. And there's a ship from New York on its way with explosives, isn't there?
Yes. Yeah. Also, they believe.
Yeah. Meanwhile, there's a lot of plotting in a pub, isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, we should also say that because they're having a meeting, aren't they? Cork's in a meeting with the superintendent and his inspector and Sergeant Tovey, and it gets interrupted by one of Sergeant Cork's informers.
I was going to say his lady friend, but she's not a lady friend in that respect, is she? But
no. So
she says she's got some information and she wants £25.
Yes. So they can emigrate to Australia.
Yeah, because basically her other half's involved.
He is.
And he's talking in his sleep and stuff, isn't he? And tossing.
Yes.
And turning.
Yes.
Do I do that?
Sometimes.
That's right. I'm not involved in in blowing things up.
No.
But there's a load of plotting in a pub. Mm-hmm. But the end of part 1 cliffhanger, and I just wrote down, goes a bit Oliver Twist.
It does.
Yeah, why does it go Oliver Twist?
Because the chap that's involved in the whole affair finds out that his lady, she's called Biddy, isn't she? Yep, has been to see Sergeant Cork. Yeah. And has therefore betrayed him. So he does a Bill Sykes.
And he's going to clonk her on the head with his weapon, isn't he?
Yeah.
Then I wrote down Stilton. Why did I write down Stilton? Because it's about the only Christmassy thing, isn't it? Stilton.
Yes. Because Sergeant Cork, he was going to meet Sergeant Tovey at a restaurant for a meal, and he missed it because he got called out to this murder. Yeah. So he invites him back to his lodgings because his landlady's a good cook. Yeah. And Sergeant Tovey says he'll bring some Stilton.
But all this funeral stuff. Mm-hmm. So what's it? What's the funeral for, or who's it for?
The funeral is for the son of Lord Liscara, who's been killed on. He's a soldier who's been killed on active duty in Afghanistan.
Yeah. This chap, he's not sympathetic to the Irish cause, is he?
He's definitely not sympathetic to the Irish cause. No.
And he just wants them sort of, know their place, basically.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, and William Gaunt is doing a lot of rolling of his eyes, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All this plotting in the pub, it's going to get investigated by Tovey and half a dozen constables.
Yes. Well, they find out because they find this ship, or the captain of the ship that's bought this explosives supposedly in. and they basically say to him, if anybody dies, you could hang. So he tells them where to find where he dropped the case off at, which is the pub.
And they've also found on Biddy's body a list of names, haven't they?
A list of names and this thing from the funeral director with the schedule of what's going to happen.
Yeah, Tovey wants to take firearms, so it's almost Dixon and Doc Green firearms were issued,
almost,
isn't it?
Yeah.
But only he is allowed to take his gun in the end,
because the superintendent doesn't want Bobby's armed.
Yeah, but Cork and Marriott are late back basically because of the trains.
Because they've been to see Lord Liscara and they've missed the train. The next one's not for 2 hours.
Yeah.
So.
But then there's this mysterious crate.
Yes.
In the cellar of the pub, and you I think at first you assume it's explosives, don't you?
Yeah.
But then it's revealed and it's a Gatling gun, isn't it?
It is.
And I like the way it's shot, because it's shot almost like it's like a science fiction gun, isn't it? Like a sort of laser gun or something like that.
In sort of some ways, I mean, you said it was first invented in 1861. We're not that much beyond that. Only
it's a new thing.
So it's a relatively new thing still.
And it's quite a horrific thing, isn't it? The way it works. Yeah. As unfortunately, we soon find out as the peelers. Yeah. As they're called, raid the pub, and you don't actually see it. It's all very heavily implied.
But you see the start of it because you see the chap with the gun start to turn the
crank handle,
and you hear the rounds going off.
And there's two rows of bottles,
which will get smashed,
which go off one after the other. Clearly, somebody's had to lay charges for the set design. Yeah. So end of part 1 is a murder. Yeah. End of part 2 is a massacre.
Yeah, they've stepped it up a little bit.
And I just wrote, Happy Christmas, everyone. There's a feast of festive entertainment on ITV. Deary me. And I wrote, all that's left is the Stilton.
Yes.
Because
they all get killed.
Yeah. So it's six bobbies and
the sergeant.
And the sergeant.
Yeah, because basically they're sort of trapped on a narrow stairway.
Yeah, they're sort of coming in blinded by the light.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see that there's much light in there. But,
no, they're coming from the light into the dark.
Oh, is it? They can't see.
So you're right. It takes you a few seconds for your eyes to adjust, doesn't it?
No, there is one other bit of comedy. It's from Chalky, who says, I tried to make coffee, but it come out wrong, so you've got tea.
Yeah.
Chalky's the sort of helper at the police station,
the sort
isn't
of,
he?
Yeah.
He makes tea.
He makes tea and cleans
and
the
grumbles,
rooms and
basically.
grumbles a lot, yeah.
But the list of names, they sort of work out is the attendees at the funeral, isn't it?
Yes.
Because there's going to be, 12 pallbearers?
Yes.
Because it's a lead-lined coffin or something.
Yeah. Well, basically, if you're bringing a body back from India...
Yeah.
I mean, I don't quite know how they would have preserved bodies in the past, but you would probably need a lead-lined coffin to stop any odours, shall we say.
Meanwhile, at the church, they're setting up, aren't they? Because there's this private chapel they're going to go in. We'd better explain that.
Yes, it's the chapel on the estate, isn't it? So, yeah.
Basically, all the plotters are there, aren't they? Mm-hmm. And the Gatling gun arrives.
Yes, in the coffin.
Yeah. And they're going to set it up in the private bit.
Yeah.
So that
in the vault,
so that when all the pallbearers come through, they're just going to basically get shredded, aren't they?
Yes, they're gonna shoot them down.
Deary me.
Yeah. I mean, because they get the Undertaker's assistant, don't they? Because they want to find out what's going on. And he insists that the funeral is the next.
It's tomorrow,
which should give them a clue really as to what is happening.
But then the vicar stumbles across it, doesn't he?
Does,
yeah. And they do capture one of the blokes, the police. And Cork enters with a white flag and Marriott.
A hanky, yes. A hanky.
Is it a hanky?
Yeah.
Hanky on the is it on the stick?
No, he's holding it in
he's
his hand.
He's just waving it about.
Just flapping it about.
Waving his bogies at them.
It is quite clean, actually.
Victorian bogies. I don't know if they're worse than like modern day ones. But yeah, Cork has a sort of. He tries to sort of negotiate for peace, doesn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's a real sort of Cork thing, isn't it? That, he's not. He doesn't want people to fight. He wants them to basically.
But he's still quite angry about what happened the previous night.
Yeah, well, with reason, I think. Yeah, because his mate bought it and he didn't get his Stilton. So do you think he took his Stilton home or not?
Don't know.
He had it later. As they say, so we either die here or we hang. So you know,
they've got nothing to lose.
That's the thing. There's no easy way out for them, is there?
I think the idea is that if they die fighting, it's a more honourable death than being hung.
But eventually the army is sent in because it's Sergeant Cork. We can't afford an army, so we don't see it. No. But what we do hear is the sounds of battle.
Yes.
And Cork and Maigret just sort of observe, don't they, from safety?
Yeah.
And they're not happy about it, are they?
No, because you know
it would be.
Who would be? It's yes.
But it again, it's. You know, Dixon Dock Green is Ted Willis, Sergeant Cork is Ted Willis.
Yeah.
And we always say Ted Willis has always got a point of view.
Yeah.
This isn't a Ted Willis episode.
No, it's not.
But it still adheres to his sort of vision of Cork, isn't it? Yeah. But, my word.
Yeah. Anybody sitting down, sort of, you know, the Saturday between Christmas and New Year, thinking, I'll watch the telly tonight. There'll be, you know, something nice and light-hearted on. Yeah. And they get a massacre.
So basically, Doctor Who and his chums are dying of radiation.
Yeah.
And Sergeant Cork has a massacre.
Yeah.
So it really is a cheery night, isn't it? Yeah. But so as Christmas things go, it's not the most Christmassy.
It's not. No. But it's a very good episode.
Would you have perhaps bumped it to a week later?
I think I might have started the series a week later. Yeah. So that it started in January rather than between Christmas and New Year.
That's the way that schedules go.
But I guess, as I say then, maybe, you know, now there seems to be more emphasis on things being Christmassy, but you still do get things that have murders in, maybe not massacre.
Well, the only thing I'm thinking of is EastEnders.
Yeah, EastEnders is never cheery.
EastEnders is always grim as arseholes, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, but Sergeant Cork is as well at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, thankfully there are some other cheery ones later on, because I always remember. I noticed on the back you've got Sergeant Cork and Maigret with their holiday hats
seaside
on.
outfits on.
Yeah. So that's perhaps a bit more fun.
Mm-hmm.
But there we go. That's Sergeant Cork at Christmas.
It's a very good episode, and it's a very good series. If you've never seen Sergeant Cork, try it, because
was it in the last network sale? Sometimes
not
it is,
the
sometimes
last one.
isn't.
No, I don't think. No. But
we've still got a few to finish, haven't we?
We have.
Yeah, we should finish it.
We've got it as separate volumes. You can buy it as a complete series now, so you'll have the whole of Sergeant Cork in one box. But it's really good. You know, everybody should watch Sergeant Cork.
But there we go. So that's our final article of this episode, and our final article for this year. It's been a tricky year for us, hasn't it?
It has been a tricky year. We're hoping to get back to a more regular schedule.
Hopefully we can get back on the production line a bit more next year. I'm not going to make any promises yet.
No.
Don't hold your breath for an episode in January, but we'll see how it goes. Our cupboard's a little bare at the moment, isn't it, when it comes to articles? Yeah. But we'd like to wish you all a happy Christmas.
Yes.
Don't get involved in any massacres if you can help it.
Try not to.
Yeah. But you can have some Stilton.
Yeah.
Do you like Stilton?
No.
No, I don't think I do.
That is quite Christmassy Stilton.
I might have some Dorset Blue Vinny.
That's not great.
Well, I don't mind a blue vein at Christmas. Do you?
No. I don't like it.
That'll make Warren giggle. Right, so happy Christmas, and we'll see you in 2022.
Okay.
That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Bye!
Bye!
That was episode 60 of Round the Archives.
Starring Lisa Parker, Andrew Trowbridge, Martin Holmes, Paul Chandler and Toppie Smellie.
Thanks also to Ben Baker and Simon Coward.
On the musical side, you heard Dan Tate and Paul Chandler.
The script for Sergeant Cork, The Case of the Fenian Men, was by Bill Craig.
And the producer was Jack Williams. On the first day of podcasts, a listener gave to me a raspberry mini and a foot-long dog. On the second day of podcasts, a listener gave to me 2 rally archives and a raspberry mini and a foot-long dog. On the third day of podcasts, a listener gave to me 3 sledgehammers, 2 rally archives and a raspberry mini and a foot-long dog. On the 4th day of podcasts, the listener gave to me 4 vision on sound, 3 sledgehammers, 2 rally archives and a raspberry mini and a foot-long dog. On the 5th day of podcasts, the listener gave to me The Shy Life. 4 vision on sound, 3 sledgehammers, 2 rally archives and a raspberry mini and a foot-long dog. On the 6th day of podcasts, the listener gave to me 6 space soldiers, The Shy Life. 4 vision on sound, 3 sledgehammers, 2 round the archives, and a raspberry mini and a foot-long dog. On the 7th day of podcasts, the listener gave to me World Enough and Time, 6 space soldiers, The Shy Life. 4 vision on sound, 3 sledgehammers, 2 round the archives, and a raspberry mini and a foot-long dog. On the 8th day of podcasts, a listener gave to me The Extra Moss Experiment, World Enough and Time, 6 space soldiers, The Shy Life. 4 vision on sound, 3 sledgehammers, 2 round the archives, and a raspberry mini and a foot-long dog. On the 9th day of podcasts, a listener gave to me Toppie, Smellie, Smellcast, the Extra Moss Experiment, World Enough and Time, 6 space soldiers, The Shy Life. 4 vision sound, 3 sledgehammers, 2 round the archives, and a raspberry mini and a foot-long dog. On the 10th day of podcasts, a listener gave to me Toby's Time Travels, Toppie Smellie's Podcast, The Extra Moss Experiment, World Enough and Time, 6 space soldiers, The Shy Life. 4 vision on sound, 3 sledgehammers, 2 round the archives, and a raspberry mini and a foot-long dog. On the 11th day of podcasts, a listener gave to me Looks Unfamiliar, Toby's Time Travels, Toppie Smellie Smellcast, The Extra Moss Experiment, World Enough and Time, all these things, Space Soldiers, The Shy Life. 4 vision on sound, 3 sledgehammers, 2 round the archives, and a raspberry mini and a foot-long dog. On the 12th day of podcasts, a listener gave to me an HZUT TV drama, Looks Unfamiliar, Toby's Time Travels, Toppie Smellie's Podcast, The Extra Moss Experiment, World Enough and Time, 6 space soldiers, The Shy Life. 4 vision on sound, 3 sledgehammers, 2 around the archives, and a raspberry mini and a foot-long dog. God help you.